Police believe Sheridan was at the Moat House that night, but the case depends on key prosecution witness Matt McCall, who's said to have arranged the party. But under intense cross-examination from Gale's QC Paul McBride, his credibility collapses, and the Crown drops the Moat House chapter from the indictment. With almost half the charges now gone, the prosecution case rests with a whimper.
You consider the fact that 50% of the charges are gone. For any accused, that is a major turning point. When you consider the fact that 90% of the charges against Gale disappear as a result, that is a major turning point to realise that you've almost made it.
For the first time, there is a spring in the Sheridan step as they leave court. Sheridan calls a string of witnesses who claim his SSP colleagues had been jealous of his profile and were out to get him. He produces 2 people who tell the court that they were with him in Glasgow on the night he's accused of going to Cupid's. Prosecutors in this case have been very keen to avoid the trial becoming a David and Goliath, Tommy Sheridan against the News of the World type scenario, but for large tranches of the evidence in this case, that's exactly what it has become. The Sheridan trial became part of a wider story involving a phone tapping scandal at the News of the World. Part of Sheridan's defence is that the newspaper is out to get him at any cost. Royal correspondent Clive Goodman had employed private investigator Glenn Mulcair to help him hack into the phones of senior royals. Both were jailed, but suspicion lingers that phone hacking was far more widely used. Journalist Nick Davies has been investigating the story since 2006.
Phone hacking has been absolutely endemic, particularly on the tabloid newspapers in Fleet Street for years. And there are lots of journalists who will tell you, for example, that they would be hacking into some public figure's voicemail, hear a really good message, and then delete it to stop journalists from other newspapers hacking in and getting their story.
How much was this happening at the News of the World?
Voicemail hacking was routine. Lots of reporters in the newsroom, lots of reporters in the features department, routinely listening to the messages of public figures.
Andy Coulson, then editor of the News of the World, denied all knowledge of the practice, but he still resigned over it. 2 police investigations have found no evidence of wrongdoing against him. He now has a new job, Director of Communications for Prime Minister David Cameron.
The fact that Metropolitan Police carried out an investigation where only one journalist and one private investigator were prepared to fall on their sword, but the editor of the newspaper at that time isn't even charged, isn't even questioned under caution for the interception of voicemail illegally of the royal family, for goodness sakes. I mean, if they're willing to intercept the voicemail of royal family and aides of the royal family, then how far are they willing to go with other people?
The court hears how police recovered a notebook from jailed private detective Glenn Mulcair. This is an extract from that notebook, which contains hundreds of records of the people he was investigating, including Tommy Sheridan's private details, evidence that Mulcair may have been tapping his phone.
Sometimes they run into trouble, for example, where a public figure had put in a 4-digit PIN code which they couldn't guess. And then they would get the private investigator, Glenn Mulcair, to find out what that PIN code was. And he is an expert in blagging.
Sheridan creates a stir by calling Andy Coulson away from number 10 to Glasgow to appear as a witness for the defence.
This whole Sheridan case has been important for Fleet Street because it begins to lift the lid on what the News of the World were doing, and what the News of the World was doing was by no means untypical of what newspapers have been up to. The second thing is that by sheer fluke, the guy who was the editor of the paper at the time, Andy Coulson, is now one of the most powerful officials in this country, sitting at the right hand of the Prime Minister. What's happening in the courtroom is interesting because what Tommy Sheridan has clearly been playing on is the inherent dislike that people have for a newspaper which exposes people's private lives in such a ruthless way. They are not breaking the law in order to expose terribly important things which have to be brought to the attention of the public. They're absolutely obsessed with the private lives and the sexual lives of public figures, and almost all of the illegal activity is devoted to that kind of story which has no great public interest attached to it at all.
In the witness box, Coulson denies any knowledge of Sheridan's phone being hacked. Sheridan also puts this to Bob Bird, the Scottish News of the World editor, when he takes the stand.
Well, I'll say I didn't know Glenn Mulcair existed at that time. I didn't until he was arrested in August 2006. So why he would have Tommy Sheridan's phone number and address in his notebook, I've got no idea. I had no knowledge of that before I came to court.
Sheridan is unable to prove that either editor knew about the phone tapping, but this is only part of his defence. The secret tape of Sheridan allegedly confessing everything to his childhood friend George McNeilage is understood to have been a major factor in the Crown bringing the perjury charges. But since his arrest, Sheridan has always maintained that the man in the tape is an imposter.
Was that George McNeilage that was on the tape there?
Itself, yeah.
And you recognise his voice being that of George McNeilage?
I don't know whether I recognised if I couldn't see his face, but I could see his face clearly, so, you know.
So you would accept it is George McNeilage that's on that tape?
Yeah.
Is the other person you?
No.
No. Not at all?
Not at all.
Do you feature on that tape at any part?
Not at all.
Sheridan claims the tape is a fake and that his former comrade has betrayed him. George McNeilage, what do you think about the fact that he made that tape?
I think George McNeilage is a rat. I think George will find it difficult for the rest of his life to look in a mirror and not be forced to look away. Because what he did is he colluded with the News of the World. They decided to concoct a videotape after a trial because the News of the World had been defeated. They'd been defeated despite throwing everything they had at me in the course of that libel trial. And I've got no doubts there was collusion, not just between McNeilage and the News of the World, but between others in the SSP.
It was Andy Coulson who, as UK editor of the News of the World, authorised the record £200,000 payment for the secret tape. He travelled up from London to sign the cheque himself. Sheridan challenges Andy Coulson in court, but because Sheridan's face is not clearly seen on the tape, he asked Mr Coulson how he knew it was him. In response, the former newspaper editor appeared to wink at him across the court and says, "It's your voice, Mr Sheridan. And I think you know it is."
You see a bit of ear, you see a bit of nose, you see a bit of hairline, you see his favourite duffel coat that he was wearing at that time, you see his watch, which matches up with his watch that he was wearing at that time, on his right wrist, which is kind of unusual as well to wear it on that wrist. It's definitely him, no doubt about it.
But no expert was called to authenticate the tape in court. Sheridan is adamant that his enemies have conspired against him and paid an actor to impersonate him. He produces a series of witnesses, including his sister, who testify the voice on the tape is not his. But when he appears, George McNeilage tells the court the tape is genuine. When you faced Tommy in the High Court?
No problem. Didn't like him, don't like him. I just wanted to deal with the issue. Let's go. Let's deal with it. I know that it's you in the tape. You know that it's you in the tape. You know, he shouldn't have took the trial on in the first place. He should have listened to the good advice that he was probably getting round about him not to go ahead with this trial. Instead of wasting £3 or £4 million of public money. But it could be better spent in communities like Pollock.
On the day Sheridan closes his defence, the Crown dramatically announces it's dropping all charges against Gale.
After 44 days of trial, Gale stands clear from any criminal charge. However, no further statement can be made at this time due to ongoing proceedings. Thank you.
Summing up the prosecution case, Advocate Depute Alec Prentice asked the jury to consider an entry in Sheridan's diary marked Cupid with the club's phone number next to it. He tells the jury there is no conspiracy against Sheridan. In his tearful closing speech, Sheridan says the case against him has been a persecution, not a prosecution. He tells the jury his life is at stake.
This time around, the jury can do a lot worse. Because what they can do is they can deprive me of the company of my wife and my daughter for 2, 3, 4, 5 years of my life, and that is going to be brutal. That is going to be hard to take. It's big, big, big stakes.
As the jury is sent out to consider its verdict, for his former comrades, his legacy has already been decided.
Tommy Sheridan's done more damage to the socialist movement in Scotland than any good he ever done for it. How on earth can we be here? How on earth could that be possible?
I believe that Tommy's actions are really beyond forgiveness.
I'd like Tommy to apologise. I'd like him finally to put up his hands, like he did in that meeting in 2004 at the beginning, say, I went to this club. I'd like to put him up his hands and start telling the truth for once, and start saying, look, yeah, this was crackpot. This was crazy. The craziest decision any political figure in Scotland's taken in the last 20 years.
He's been prepared to destroy a whole movement and has inflicted more damage on the socialist movement in Scotland than Rupert Murdoch and Margaret Thatcher combined.
The Sheridans leave court after the jury failed to reach a quick verdict. Tommy's fate will be revealed the following day. After more than 6.5 hours of deliberations, the jury has returned their verdict. It's guilty of perjury. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Tommy Sheridan appeared to slump forward as the jury, some of them in tears, delivered their majority verdict. The judge deferred sentence until January, but told Tommy Sheridan that when he returned to the courtroom, he had to expect to go to prison. The jury reject one subcharge relating to an affair with Anne Vercan, but find him guilty of the rest. For the first time since the case began, Gail Sheridan speaks out.
I would like to thank everybody from across Scotland for their wonderful support throughout the last 6 years that they've given to Tommy and I. Our family and our real friends have stood by us. I have and will always stand by Tommy.
My message to the nation, if I'm convicted, is I'm sorry that I haven't been able to convince a jury that I'm not guilty. I may have to spend time behind bars because a jury's found me guilty of a crime that I haven't committed. But I'm not finished. I'll come back stronger because there'll still be injustice in the world when I get out of jail, whenever that is.
Arise, ye starlings, from your slumber. Arise, ye criminals of want. For reason in revolt now thunders, and at last sends the age of cant. Then comrades, come rally, and the last fight let us face.